All right, so this is the session on sprites as pseudo classes, because maybe we're not all familiar with what a class is. All right, so let's go back to this scratch page right here. I'm gonna put in a new sprite. It doesn't. I'm just gonna draw a square as best I can. You actually hold down the Shift button. It allows you to create a square a little bit better. And actually, whenever you draw something, it also, or tell your kids to draw something, it helps to convert it to vector rather than bitmap. So I'm going to convert it to vector. It's in vector mode. And over the tools are over here on the side, which we can't see in the recording, but there's a box right here, a rectangle, and I can draw that out. And then I also have a fill. I'm going to fill that. So now I have just a black square. All right. And I am going to give it some text. I'm going to call it class. All right. Now I've created this little object right here. And I'm going to go back to my scripts. And I'm going to actually clear out this right here. So I'm going to go to the pen tool. I'm going to double click clear. So now that all that stuff is gone. So we just got a clear background. So I want you to think of a class like a blueprint. So if you hand somebody a blueprint and they have some type of technical ability, they should be able to follow the blueprint and create an item, right? And in programming, we call that item that's created an object. Yes. So essentially, if you create a class, you could theoretically stamp out or fabricate a bunch of objects. So one of the things that classes have is most classes have some type of variable that's inherent to them. So we can do that in Scratch too. We can create a variable, but rather than make it for all sprites, we want to make it for this sprite only. So that means like whatever is contained within this, when we bring it into being, it becomes an object. We want, if we're doing the state for this game and it's a 1 or a 0, we want it to be unique to that sprite right there, but not to any others, right? So it needs to be what's called a local variable. It needs to be contained within the object itself. So I'm going to say state. And now you'll notice right here that it's created, it looks different than the other ones because it says sprite 1, right? And it says state. So in real object-oriented programming, you would create a class, and like in my game of life, I created a class called cell, and I gave the cell certain variables. I said, okay, the cell has a state. It has a number of neighbors that can change, right? And for me, I also stored its XY value, the scale that I set it at, and then the age, like how long it's been alive. So I stored actually every cell object in my processing game of life has all that, each one of these little pixels has all those variables stored into it. So it's much easier to do that in processing than it is in Scratch. So we have to kind of work our way around that limitation to try to do as best we can to try to do some object-oriented programming. So one thing we can do is that we can set the state to this thing. So we can say, if you go into control, you'll notice that there's this whole thing about cloning down here. Cloning is the closest thing that we have to creating an object from a class. So if you look at the sprite itself as the class, the clone would be the object of that class. So when I start as a clone, what should it do? Well, we should probably set the state, and let's set the state to a random number. Set it between 0 and 1. So pick random between 0 and 1. Now if we do that, let me just click this a couple times and see what comes out. So 0, 0, 0, 1, 1. Okay, so it's doing what we want. It's doing integers. It's not doing floats, like decimal math, right? So when I start as a clone, do this thing. So now, when I start as a clone, we should probably also place it somewhere on the screen, right? So this is where, if we go back to this code right here, that's where this code is going to come in handy. If you weren't going to be drawing, if you were just going to be doing a sprite as a class, this is where you would create the clones. Rather than doing pen up and pen down, you create a clone and it's in that XY position that's already designated. So that's one way to do it, but we're not going to do it that way. We're just going to do, just to demonstrate the idea here, we're just going to do it in a random place. So we'll go to motion, go to XY, and then I'll just copy this pick random. We'll say pick a random number between negative 240 and 240 for X. Pick a random number between negative 180 and 180. And let's see what happens. Let's create some clones. So I'm going to go to events. I'm going to say when flag is clicked. Let's repeat it 10 times and see what happens. Control. Repeat 10 times. Create a clone of myself. 10 clones. And when it starts as a clone, it's going to do this stuff. All right? Let's see what happens. 3. Count it down for me. 3, 2, 1. All right, now we have all these classes like spread about. Now the problem is with this state variable. So let's do this. When I mouse over, let's clear this again. Let me pull out a clear. There's actually in control. There's delete this clone.
Within itself.
Yeah, I can just press stop and it will delete the clone. But I want to clear the pen tool too, so I'm going to clear that. Not stamp, clear. All right, so I also want to say when I mouse over, sensing. So if, probably need to run a forever loop on it. So it's always checking. So always check if
If costume 1 then alive, costume or essentially 1, 0.
sensing, touching the mouse pointer. And if it's touching the mouse pointer, then let's have it say what its state is. Let's just do it for a certain amount of time. Say, actually, this will work. Say the state. All right, let's see if this works. Count it down. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1. Let me take off just the say, and let me instead put say it for a second so it gets rid of it off the screen. Okay, let's try it again. Clear it, randomize it. 1, 0, 1. So now you notice that not only do we have like a bunch of clones of this thing on the screen, they each have different states, and it saves the state within the clone itself. And in that way, each one of these this class document right here is creating objects on the screen. So that's pseudo object-oriented programming with Scratch.